Given the men watching Shea's group with thinly veiled anger, she had her doubts that their departure would be an easy one. In these types of towns, gossip spread like wildfire. News of their imminent departure had made the rounds, and a crowd began forming even before they asked for their horses. Shea wasn't the only one uneasy at the attention. Burke and Sid eyed the watching crowd, noting the dangerous undercurrent and grim faces. A flutter in her peripheral vision had her looking up. Great. People watched from the windows, too. Several men had their arms crossed over their chests. One spit on the ground and walked off shaking his head. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Burke asked, coming to stand beside her, where she was cinching Dane's saddle. Shea glanced back at the townspeople. Once. When it was clear she wasn't going to say anything else, Burke stepped forward to rest a hand on the horse's neck while she bent to check its hooves. "What happened?" "Ambush. Killed 3 of our party." "No shit!" "I was just an apprentice then, but when a town gets this interested in your business, it's never good." She paused in her ministrations and gave him a long look. "James and Cam would probably tell you the same thing." He held her gaze for a long moment before walking off without a word. Shea watched him go before turning sharply back to the horse. Her movements were rough as she ran her hand along the saddle for a last check. When the horse tossed its head to avoid the bit, she nearly threw it at the beast. Taking a deep breath, she hid her face against the saddle. They should have left last night. She should have made them leave. Clearing her throat, she lifted her head and made sure her hands were gentle as she got the horse to take the bit and brought the reins over its head. Next, she moved to Wit's horse. Normally she made the men do their own preparations, but she wanted to put this town behind her as soon as possible. She was almost finished saddling the last horse when Dane and Wit strode into the courtyard with the elders right on their heels. Damn! She could already tell from the set expressions on both Wit and Dane's faces that the talks had been pointless. Seeing her standing beside 3 saddled horses, the elders' faces soured. The hawk-nosed one sneered before turning and hissing something at their head elder. A thread of strain in his voice, the white-haired man said, "Please, rethink this. You've come all this way. You shouldn't go home empty-handed." "Yes," the middle-aged black-haired man said, his voice amiable and placating as he stepped in front of Dane. "What will your elders think? At this rate, you'll have wasted months of your time with no agreement to show for it." Wit strode past the cluster and right to Shea, grabbing the reins. He spared a brief glance at the mob that watched. "You were right," he said softly. She didn't respond, and watched as Dane threw up his hands before shoving through the 3 to stalk toward Shea. A horn sounded before he reached them, blaring out in 3 sharp blows. There was a breathless pause. Then, with a rush of air, sound returned. "They're here! The Hawkvale is here!" The square exploded with movement as it emptied, leaving only Shea's men and the elders standing there. Burke and the others looked around in bewilderment at suddenly finding themselves alone. Shea noted the look of gloating satisfaction on Paul's face before her attention was pulled to where the elders arranged themselves in a line facing the gate. She got the kind of feeling she sometimes got when life was about to kick her in the teeth, the kind where all the rules got thrown out and her world was set on its head. She'd had that feeling only twice before. Both times had been devastating. "We need to leave." Shea threw the reins at Dane and headed for her horse. "Now." "I won't argue with that." Warriors clad in leather armor over silk undershirts thundered through the gate, led by a commanding figure with broad cheekbones and smiling eyes. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of the elders, barely sparing them a glance as they sank into deep bows. He frowned at the buildings surrounding the courtyard. None were taller than 2-story,